Hello again. Nice to be here with you. Today, I just want us to look at very briefly most recent topics you can find or you could come across in Ssce exams as much as possible throughout the years. And if you have been so conversant with the Waec past questions, you should have been able to actually identify some of the repeated questions. And permit me to actually discuss a few of them with you. Today we're going to be looking at one of the most trending and most repeated questions you see in biology, and that is genetics. In fact, check every year you see questions on genetics. You also see questions on evolution. Now, let me talk a little about genetics, possible questions or possible areas if you're actually going to be reading for even the upcoming Ssce questions you should, or let me say subtopics you should be looking at under genetics. Now, quickly, number one, you should take note of, in terms of objective questions, that is paper one for biology. Please take note of Mendel's experiment, where we have the monohybrid experiment and also the dihybrid experiment. Please be conversant with how those crosses are being done and how to get your F1 generations, F2 generations. Another aspect you should be looking at also under genetics is determinations of sex. Okay, determination of sex, talking about the male XY chromosomes and the female XX chromosomes in order to determine the sex in humans. Also, another thing you should look at is actually DNA replication. Look at also chromosomes. Note the number of chromosomes we have in humans. Humans have about 23 pairs of chromosomes. Note what the definition of a chromosome, and also when you're talking about the DNA, take notice of the structure of the DNA, very important. Take note of the structure of the DNA. Questions come up always on the structure of the DNA, and also where we have the nitrogen-based compounds that I'm talking about, the adenine, diamine, guanine, and cytosine. Please take note of their pairing. Most times questions on that also come. Take note of their pairing. Also, please take note of the applications of genetics. And also finally, sex linkage, mostly sex linkage. Take note of the diseases or traits that can be found in the X sex or X linkage chromosomes. Also, please take note of that, and then how to calculate the probability of an offspring, probability of offsprings that will be coming out. So these are some of the things you should take note of under the topic hereditary or genetics. Another one, again, topic you should that actually repeats in Ssce is evolution. Please take note of evolution, the definition of evolution. Also take note of Darwin's theory and Lamarck's theory, and also evolutionary trends, that is from simple to complex, and also from aquatic to terrestrial. Also take a look at, go through questions on sort of like ways to prove evolution, where we have things like the embryology, we have things like the fossil records, we have things like comparative anatomy, and so on. Please take note of those areas. These are some of the areas where questions are mostly repeated. And then also take note of variation, evolutionary, ecological variation, where we have the morphological variation and physiological variation, which also can be replaced with continuous and discontinuous variation. Please take note of the examples, very important. I keep seeing questions popping up on discontinuous and examples of discontinuous, examples of continuous variation. Also, in terms of reproduction as it relates to plants, please take note of pollination. Pollination, very key. Take note of it. Questions on pollination usually comes out, which has to do with transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. Also take note of the structure of the flower. Most times questions come up on the structure of the flower. Take note of the floral parts, which is the petals, the sepals, the androecium, and the gynoecium. Please take note of it. The stamens, which is in the androecium. Take note of the carpels, which is in the gynoecium, and all other parts that are found in it. Please take note of the structure. Also, another thing again you should take note under reproduction in plants is placentation. Take note of placentation. We have different types of placentation. Take note of the types and also the definition of placentation. Also, another thing you should take note of in reproduction in plants is seeds and fruits. Take note of seeds and fruit, development of new seeds, and also take note of the topic on fruits. Then when you come to reproduction in mammals, mostly in animals, for example, mammals, please take note of the structure of the male and the female sex cell. The structure of the male and the female. Take note of their parts, what consists of the male reproductive system and also the female reproductive system. Also, another essential thing you should take a look at is actually the gametes, which are the sex cells. Note their structures, mostly the male gametes and what it functions. Most of the parts and what the functions they actually carry. Another important thing again you should take note of is in reproduction in mammals is actually courtship behavior. Please take note of courtship behavior, the different types of courtship behavior and examples of courtship behavior. And then finally, on reproduction in mammals, please take note of fertilization processes. Okay, mostly take a look at things like the placenta, the functions of the placenta. Take note of the placenta and the functions of the placenta. Take note of the umbilical cords. Take note of the uterus, and so many of these things and their functions. These are key things, key questions that are usually repeated. Also, if we digress a little, take note of conservation of natural resources. Now, that particular questions always pop up. Conservation of natural resources, very key and important to remember them. Take note of mostly wildlife and forest. They keep bringing questions mostly on wildlife and forest. Wildlife and forest. Note the methods of conservation. Note the benefits of the conservation of wildlife and also the forest. Also, another thing you should take a look at is adaptation. Take a look at, read properly, structural adaptation. Questions usually come up on structural adaptation and behavioral adaptation. Also take a look at social insects. Now, the social insects you should actually look at, most times repeated questions come on termites than on bees. You see more questions on termites than on bees. But my advice is that you should also read up, try as much as possible to cover areas on bees, but let your full concentration be on social insects like termites, okay? Study much on them and note about these, their nuptial flights and all the others. Very key and very important. Also, another topic that usually comes out is in nutrient cycling. Now, under nutrient cycling, please take note of nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle. Take note of nitrogen fixation. Take note of nitrification, ammonification, denitrification. These are areas that are very key you should take note of. Also, another repeated question topic you can find across the years, and I'm also suspecting they will come up this 2024, it's also as biological association. Now, in terms of biological association, we're talking about symbiosis, mutualism, commensalism. We're talking about parasitism, predation, and competition. Please take note of all these examples. These are some of the questions that will show up during objective questions. These are some of the objective questions that usually show up. Also, another thing you should be looking at is the topic on excretion and respiration. topics on excretion and respiration. Yes. Look in terms of respiration, please take note of the organs, excretion rather. Take note of excretory organs of some organisms. Very important. Questions on it usually pops up. Excretory organs of some organisms. Another one again you should actually look at is still on excretion is the kidney. Check the structure of the kidney. Please be conversant with the structure of the kidney. Look at it when you have a longitudinal section of the kidney. Also, it's important you also take note of the structure of the urinary system. Okay, urinary system, which has to do with the kidney, the ureter, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. And also, please take note of the urine formation. Okay, urinary tubules rather, where we have the Bowman's capsule. Please take note of all these stages that are involved during urine formation. These are key objective areas where you can find objective questions. Very important. Also, in terms of respiration, please take note of respiratory, the conditions for respiration, which has to do with a lot of them: ventilation, respiratory medium, respiratory surfaces, transport medium, respiratory organs. Please take note of them, and also take note of the characteristics of respiratory surfaces. And then also under respiration, please take a look at the gills. Look at the structure of the gills. Note the parts that are involved, like the gill filament. We have the gill arc, we have the gill rakers. Please take note of them and what they do, the functions of these parts of the gills. And then finally, please take note of respiration in mammals. That is, you're looking at the respiratory system of man, talking about the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchus, the bronchioles, the lungs itself, the alveoli, and all these other parts that makes the respiratory system of mostly man. So please, these are areas you should actually touch, and also read up external respiration, which has to do with breathing in and breathing out, the processes that are involved in breathing in, and also the processes involved in breathing out. Okay, so these are areas you should take a look at under respiration. Now, for transportation or transport system, well, not much questions usually pop up, but you can find one or two in every year. So, but the areas you should actually concentrate on is the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. These three areas: the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. If any question comes up, it is within this range. And also, please take note of respiratory system in plants, and also transport system in plants. Now, for respiratory system in plants, take note of the xylem, the stomata and the lenticel. But in terms of transport systems in animals, please take notes of transpiration. Questions on transpiration usually comes up. Take note of translocation. Take note of the xylem and also the phloem. Very important. Take note of them. And then also in digestive system, questions usually comes up on digestive system, but not so profound, not most repeated. But please take note of the digestion process in man. Very key. These are where questions usually comes up in terms of biology paper 1. That's when you're looking at the enzymes that acts in the mouth, the enzymes that acts in the stomach, the enzymes that acts in the duodenum, the small intestine. Very important. Please take note of them, and the substrate on which these enzymes act. Okay, and then also another thing again you should take note of is actually take note of questions on the skeletons. Okay, take note of questions on the skeletons. Now, the skeleton is actually another important aspect you should look at. Very important. Please take note of the axial skeleton. Take note of the appendicular skeleton. Take note of joints as well as muscles. These are frequent areas where you can find questions coming up. Axial and appendicular, very important. Also, you should also take note of basic ecological concepts. Now, under basic ecological concepts, the areas you should be actually looking at is the definition of terms. That's the ecological concepts, like population, the definition for population, biosphere, ecosystem, questions of the definitions like biomes, ecological niche, and so on. These are very key areas where you should actually be looking at. And then also another key area you should actually consider under basic ecological concept is soil types and water holding capacity. Very important. Water holding capacity. Also, please take note of ecological factors where you have abiotic and biotic factors. And then finally, take note of population and how to calculate 1 or 2 questions on that particular aspect. Now, another important thing, most repeated questions you see is in functioning ecosystem. Functioning ecosystem, please, very key one. Please take note of food chain and food web, trophic level, pyramid of energy, and pyramid of numbers. These are important areas to look out for under functioning ecosystem. Now, another important area you should look at is plant and animal nutrition. Yes, very important. Mostly animal nutrition as it relates to food test. Please take note of food test. Very important. Repeated questions. Food test. Mostly as it relates to test for proteins, test for fats and oils, test for carbohydrates, reducing sugars, simple sugars, and complex sugars. Also, please take note of most of these minerals and vitamins and their deficiencies, okay? Their deficiencies. Also, as it relates to plant nutrition, we have mineral requirements of plants. We have the major elements and the minor elements, which can also be called the trace elements and so on. Please take note of them and their functions. Take note of them and their functions. Now, particularly take note of mineral elements that are important in the formation of chlorophyll. Important in the formation of chlorophyll. We have nitrogen, we have iron, we have magnesium. Take note of these. These are important areas that are usually repeated. If they will ask mineral requirements, they will always come to these areas, mostly as it relates to plant nutrition. Please take note on the formation of minerals that are actually responsible for the formation of chlorophyll and their deficiencies. Very important. And then also another area which is very, very important, the same way, in fact, it's as important as genetics. As important as genetics. Genetics is almost every year with evolution, every year. Now, every year you will always see questions on cells. Every year you will always see questions on cells. So please try as much as possible to be conversant, so conversant with questions or with the topic cells. Read about cells, definition of cells, read about forms in which cells exist, read about the cell structure and the organelles that are found in those cells. There's plant and animal cells, and also please take note of their of the functions of those organelles, the functions of those organelles. Another important area you should take a look at is a brief history of cells. Note some of the scientists and their works, their discoveries on cells, about cells. And then also please take note of some properties and functions of the cells. Note the function of the cell as in movement, in respiration, in nutrition, irritability, which has to do with responses. That is the tactic response, nastic response, and the tropic responses. Also take note of excretion and reproduction of cells. These are areas that every year questions on this comes out, and I bet you this year these questions will also pop up. You're also going to see questions on cells. Always you're going to see questions on cells. Also, please do a little brush up on osmosis and diffusion. On osmosis and diffusion. And also, I would also encourage you to read up classifications of living organisms. No, most persons are bored with that particular topic, but it is always key. Every year, questions on classifications comes up. Please take note of all the kingdoms. That is Kingdom Monera, Kingdom Protista, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae, and Kingdom Animalia. Please, diagrams are important in biology, mostly when it comes to protists. Note the structure of these protists: amoeba, paramecium, euglena, and chlamydomonas. Please, and even spirogyra. Please take note of the diagram of these protists. Please, spirogyra is not actually a protist. It is a under kingdom Plantae. So it is a talophyte, it's a green algae. But please take note of the structure of spirogyra. And then finally, you can talk about organizations of life. Okay, note the four organizations of life. We have cells, we have tissues, we have organs, and then we have systems. And I believe if you actually put your weight in these areas, you're not only just going to cover your paper 1, I believe strongly you're going to cover your 2 and 3 as well. So I wish to see you in our next video. Bye for now. Have a nice time.